In 1952, the Chinese government began physically tearing apart and reorganizing the country's higher education system. Comprehensive universities were cut down, specialized polytechnics were built up, and campuses across the country became massive construction sites. But the intellectual reorganization moved even faster. This visualization shows the 388 courses offered at Tsinghua University in 1954. Within 2 years of the restructuring, 75% of those courses, 290 in total, were running entirely on teaching syllabi written in Moscow and translated into Chinese. Numbers like that do not happen through organic enthusiasm. A university faculty cannot voluntarily source, translate, print, distribute, and adopt hundreds of highly technical foreign documents in under 24 months. To hit a 75% saturation rate across a leading technical university requires a rigid, state-directed logistical process. The Soviet educational model was put in place like industrial equipment. The Ministry of Education explicitly ordered this process in late 1952, stating that translating Soviet higher education textbooks in a planned, step-by-step way was an arduous task that brooks no delay. A few months later, they reiterated the mandate with a very specific set of instructions. This flowchart shows the exact bureaucratic hierarchy demanded. First, national teaching plans dictated strict, unified syllabi. Textbooks came last as mere attachments at the bottom. They imported instructions for running a university top-down. The books simply came along for the ride. But ordering the translation of highly complex mathematics texts is one thing. Physically producing them is another. To solve that, the government approved the creation of a new state organ in 1954 called the Higher Education Press. Rather than starting from scratch, they built this new entity on the bones of the commercial press, China's oldest and most distinguished commercial publishing house. The state requisitioned the printing plants, the specialized typesetters, and the nationwide distribution networks entirely. By completely subsuming a mature commercial supply chain, the ministry solved the massive logistical bottleneck of moving Russian mathematics into Chinese classrooms. To guarantee these translated materials were actually used on the ground, the state dismantled the Chinese academic structure and replaced it with a Soviet organizational unit, the cathedra, or Teaching Research Office. This chart illustrates the strict vertical cathedra hierarchy, dictating how directors, lecturers, and students report to one another. Right at the top sits the Soviet scientific advisor, a permanent mandatory fixture. The flow of people through this hierarchy was highly deliberate. Throughout the 1950s, China sent roughly 9,000 students and teachers to the USSR, while bringing in fewer than 900 Soviet experts. That 10-to-1 ratio reveals the exact design of the transfer. The incoming Soviet experts were not there to teach Chinese students. They were imported specifically to train and rewire the Chinese teachers. By the end of 1954, 43% of all science courses nationwide were running on Soviet texts. In a country that had to commission, check, and print every translation from a standing start 5 years prior, 43% represents the physical speed limit of human translation. The constraint on adoption was never the willingness of the faculty. The bureaucratic machine had completely saturated the intellectual and physical capacity of the country. Then, in the summer of 1960, the political winds shifted. The Sino-Soviet split severed relations, and Moscow abruptly withdrew its people. Within a matter of weeks, roughly 1,400 Soviet personnel vanished from Chinese territory. Hundreds of scientific cooperation projects halted entirely, and the higher education press, created strictly to manage the translation pipeline, was temporarily dissolved into another entity. Over the following 2 decades, Chinese-authored textbooks replaced the translated Soviet volumes across university reading lists, but the people writing those new books had been trained entirely inside the Soviet structure. The foreign experts were gone, but the cathedra, unified syllabi, and strict pedagogical methods survived. The physical books changed, but the architecture remained. Fast forward to a gathering of Chinese mathematicians in early 2005. They realized that in the decades following the split, the flow of information from Russia had completely dried up. They were entirely disconnected from what modern Russian mathematics teaching was doing. To bridge this estrangement, they proposed a massive project to translate 37 volumes of Russian mathematics. The publisher chosen to execute this mandate was the newly independent Higher Education Press, the exact same organization founded 52 years earlier for that identical purpose. Among the volumes published in 2010 was a text on the theory of functions by Natanson. It was a revision of the 1956 Chinese edition, translated by Xu Riyun, the first Chinese woman to earn a doctorate in mathematics. She died in 1969 as a result of Cultural Revolution persecution. Her translation of the text returned to Chinese universities. She did not. The individuals who operated the translation machine were destroyed or forgotten, but the bureaucratic institution they installed remained permanently ingrained.